The average age a boy first encounters pornography is 10 years old. Pornography wants to capture our sons' souls and enslave them. But you can lead your son to live free of pornography, and we want to help you do that. This is the Freedom to Love podcast. Happy Easter and welcome back to the Freedom to Love podcast. Thanks for joining us for this episode. Have you ever wondered if there's something you can do when your kids are young to reduce the chances that they turn to negative or sinful habits like pornography, drugs, or alcohol? Well, mental health researchers have proven that emotionally secure and strong kids are less likely to turn to negative habits to cope with difficult emotions or to give in to peer pressure. And so I'm excited to explore how we can help you do that on today's podcast. I'm going to discuss with Linda Kracht some concepts from the book, The 7 Desires of Every Heart by Dr. Mark Laaser. Dr. Laaser was a Protestant pastor who struggled with pornography addiction. And through the process of healing and recovery from his own addiction, and then helping hundreds of other couples heal from the wounds of addiction, he identified the necessity of having 7 desires met in order to experience personal freedom and have healthy relationships. But before we get into that, let me introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Rohr, and I'm the founder of Freedom to Love. We are a ministry devoted to helping parents raise sons who can live free of pornography. And we provide resources like this podcast for parents to give you encouragement and practical tips to raise your sons to live free of pornography and sexual sin. I have a couple speaking events coming up later in May, and so I want to invite you to visit our website, freedomtolove.org. On there, you'll see a link to sign up for our biweekly newsletter, and that way you can stay up to date on all upcoming events and presentations that I'll be giving. And of course, if there's ever anything that we can do to help you or someone you care about, we're here to serve you. We want to help you and the people you care about live free of pornography and live the virtue of chastity. And on that note, please continue to pray for the young man participating in a chastity course I'm leading at St. Michael Catholic Church in St. Michael. We are just over halfway through an 8-week course with 30 boys participating, learning how to live the virtue of chastity. And I'm just so impressed with these young men and their commitment to grow in the faith and in virtue. The response has been excellent, and so I just appreciate all your prayers. And with that, let's get on to this week's podcast. Again, Linda Kracht, she's the author of Daughters and Sons Forever, Parenting Against the Tide, and we'll be discussing the 7 desires of every heart. Enjoy this week's podcast. Welcome back to the Freedom to Love podcast. I'm excited to have another conversation with Linda Kracht. She is the founder and creator of Fortifying Families of Faith, and a great resource we've been talking about called Daughters and Sons Forever, Parenting Against the Tide. One of the things that really stood out to me was the great information that she put into these books. And particularly my interest with Freedom to Love and our Save Our Sons program is to help parents understand what can we do even before our sons encounter pornography for the first time that we can do to build them up so that once they experience it, they will be able to more quickly just let it bounce off them, that they won't have a deep emotional need to come back to it, to fill an emotional void or even a spiritual void that hasn't been filled so far in their life. And she references in chapter 3 of her book that we all have 7 desires of our heart. And it's actually taken from Dr. Mark and Debbie Laaser. Dr. Mark is no longer with us, but they wrote a great book called The 7 Desires of the Heart. And I just thought it would be so valuable for parents to hear what are these 7 desires and some tips that Linda would offer to parents to be able to build these in, particularly in those formative years, probably ages 2 through 8, maybe, where we're creating that strong emotional base for them. So, Linda, welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Yeah. So, what was your initial interest in the Seven Desires? Because you're very well read. I can tell from the book, it's very thorough. But was there anything in particular that initially brought you an interest in the book, The Seven Desires of the Heart, that resonated with you?
So when I was the chairman of the board for couple league, we were told by a marriage counselor that the one thing we're not addressing with natural family planning is the problem of pornography abuse. And he said that within your organization, he said you really need to produce a book on the dangers of pornography. And so we did. As an organization, we produced a book. So that's where I came across the name Dr. Mark Laaser. And then I read his book. That was 20 years ago. And then I reread Mark's book when I was rewriting this book because I thought that he really had touched on something really significant with Seven Desires of Every Heart. And everybody should go buy it and read it because it's a really treasure. And Debbie's book as well, which I can't remember. So he talks about those seven desires that need to be filled in us. I wish I would have known about this when I was raising our kids because you have a sense of something is off here or needs to be filled there. And even within our own marriage, I remember going to a Cana dinner one day and they were talking about how everybody needs their little glass filled up with pebbles every day. So every time you do something nice, you put a pebble in and take one out, and pretty soon you'd have a full glass. But they didn't get into these seven desires at all. So it was all kind of general. And so as Dave and I would struggle with certain things, I did not quite understand some things. And then I read this book and I thought, oh, okay, this is it here. I really thought he had excellent points. So anyway, highly
Yeah.
recommend.
Oh, I agree. It ironically, less than a week ago, somebody suggested I read the book again, and I already knew we were going to have this conversation. So I actually downloaded the audiobook and was listening to it on a work trip last week and just loved it. I loved it. I agree that it puts words to something that we kind of intrinsically know. And those are always some of the things I appreciate in authors. It's the beauty of understanding how God created us to be. So,
And from it, I kind of learned, I think that's why I write books, because I have that desire to be heard and understood that maybe wasn't quite fulfilled or in me when I was a younger child, because I have always wanted to be heard and understood. And I get really upset when, when my husband doesn't seem to hear or understand me. You know, of all the seven desires, that one hits my core the most.
yeah, I may have been guilty of that yesterday at Costco. Not saying I don't want to incriminate myself, but well, let's start there with desire number one, the desire to be heard and understood. Just explain that a little and any advice you would have or encouragement for parents raising children.
So I think when kids come home from school, they're saying a lot, even though they're not saying anything, right? So sometimes you have to pull it out of them because they're thinking and they're saying things with their actions and their body and their frustrations. And maybe they're mad at somebody or they get mad or they throw their book. And then when you say, what's the matter? You know, what's the matter? Oh, nothing. Well, that's not true, obviously. So kids need to be heard. And if they just say, some dribble, you have to be patient enough to really draw it out of them. I think I was good at that as a parent. I think I could understand. I didn't like the one-liners and I needed to understand more. And so maybe I did it more for myself than for them. But I would draw that out of them. Some of the other areas I wasn't so strong. So, but I think that parents can get really intuitive if they just watch, listen, and hear what's not necessarily even being said.
Yeah. One of the things I encourage parents to do in my workshops, because it's helpful to help boys learn to identify the emotions. Because, first of
Yeah.
all, as guys, we're not good at that. But then, two, really, when it comes to emotional language, there's an element that we experience something and we kind of describe it, and then someone labels it for us. And so I recommend that parents at dinner, at family dinners, go around and share maybe a high and low from the day. And what's great about that is if you have everyone kind of focus on that child, one, it lets them know that what they have to say is important. And that's going to make them more likely than later on to be willing to share. But it also gives the parent the chance to, when a child describes the low from the day, now you can say, wow, that sounds like that was really frustrating, or you felt left out, or you felt, and the parent can begin to give some of these emotional labels to it. And I think that's a great way to tee that up. And, it fosters that environment where our kids are going to be more willing to open up to us.
A priest sent me a note about a year ago from Arizona, and I'm not sure how he got my contact information, but he wanted me to reproduce the page that's all about the feelings. Because he said that he really feels like young seminarians are not in touch with their feelings and they need to be as well. But you had said earlier that you think boys aren't as good at it as girls. I don't think girls are very good at it either.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes they say they feel, this way, but in truth, I think that sometimes the first words out of our mouth aren't really what we're really feeling. It just is an easy thing to say. So they're easy to say something more so than maybe a young boy versus a young girl, but I don't think they're necessarily spot on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a good differentiation. Probably what the priest, and tell me if you think that this is accurate, guys just maybe aren't as comfortable with the emotions.
Yeah, I think that's it. They don't want to admit it or they don't want to
Right.
have to say, I feel, because then they're going to feel like, I don't know, emotions have always been connected to women, that women are good with their emotions and men aren't. And I don't think that that's true at all. And there
Okay.
is a list of feelings so Peg is her name, and she also works at Faithful and True, another psychologist there. And she has a whole book on emotion. And I really liked her book. And so I co-opted some of the different emotions in the one chapter. So giving your kid a list of if your child isn't really good about it, being able to identify their feelings, but then instead of telling them, maybe let them take a first crack at it. Here's a list. Which one do you think is the emotion that you're talking about?
Yeah, very good. The second desire is the desire to be blessed. What is the desire to be blessed?
The desire to be blessed means that they know that their parents love them for who he or she is. And the saddest thing as a natural family planning teacher that I would hear people say over and over and over in front of kids, in front of, we were at a, well, let me back up. We were at a hockey game and this couple was behind us and we had taught them NFP and they had their two girls with them. And she poked me and she said, "Hi, I'm blah, blah, blah. And you taught us NFP." And I said, "Oh, that's great. How's everything going?" She said, "Good, but we're done at 2 because I don't want any more kids." And when I hear people say that in front of their kids, I know that that has got to hurt because if she didn't want any more, because these two are such, you know, mulligans that she, she can't possibly have another more child, what does that say about the two that she's got? And this one struck home to me because I was talking to a woman years ago and she had just had a tubal ligation and her son was in the background, but I didn't think he was hearing this. And then he came up to us later and he said, "Yeah, mom just can't have any more kids because I guess I was just too big of a problem." So that's the feeling of unblessedness, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how many parents are talking constantly about their kids driving them crazy, or they got too much to do, or it's just those all detract from those children feeling blessed. Whereas constantly being propped up and say, "We are so blessed to have you in our
Yeah.
life. And there's always room for one more of you, you
Yeah.
know."
Yeah. I love telling my daughters when they were growing up that the three best days of my life were the day that I married their mom and the day that each of them were born. And it's true. It's the joy and the love. I remember when our first daughter was born and we were hoping to have a second child, and the question went through my head, how could I love another child as much as I love my first daughter? And then our second daughter was born and I was like, wow. It magnified the love. It was like we live in a world where we think things are finite and can't expand, but I experienced in that love, it just doubled instantly.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. And we unfortunately, it's sad for me to hear also the stories of people that choose to not have more children. My wife, we were married about 5 years and she was diagnosed with cancer. And as a result of that, we were unable to have more children. And we also have great pain from that because we wanted more. And so yeah, hopefully people will recognize the blessings. And you mentioned in the last podcast that you're particularly sensitive to when people don't have gratitude. And maybe that's something that if we're not there, that we feel our kids are blessings, maybe we can take some time just to recognize the gratitude. So, because as I mentioned, our daughters are 22 and 23, and we know our days with them are, that we're blessed. They actually both live at home still.
Yeah.
And where most parents would be like, oh gosh, get out of here. We're just kind of treasuring it because we know that won't always be the case. So it is a great blessing to have time with them. The third desire is the desire to be safe and secure. So I don't know if you have it in the book, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs, physical safety, some of that kind of stuff. But does it go beyond that?
Well, safe and secure does go beyond that because you can be insecure and feeling unsafe if the environment that you're living in is tumultuous or there's a lot of fighting or a lot of emotional abuse or there's a lot of not being heard and understood or I so safety and security is more than just physical. It's also psychological.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to a podcast recently and he was talking about we can have tragedies in our life, but tragedies don't have to turn into trauma if someone can be there to help guide us through that. And I think in particular, we know a gal that recently went through some difficult stuff and her son came to her one day and, just could tell that he was bothered by it and he was uncertain. And again, she just gave some labels to the emotion. And it sounds like you're confused. And he's like, yeah. And she just said, it's tough to be confused, isn't it? And just by, again, hearing, putting some words to it, acknowledging what he's feeling, all of a sudden it was like, okay, my mom gets me.
Yeah.
She understands me. This might be difficult, but I am safe with my mom. I think that's so good because, again, particularly as we work to help boys either avoid pornography or overcome addictive behaviors related to it, for men and boys that do struggle with it, a lot of times it is an emotional need they're trying to fill that maybe they didn't have. And that emotional safety and security is such a big part of it.
Yeah. And if there's not a lot of chaos at home too, so the parents are able to even attend to the emotional needs of their children, right?
Absolutely. Well, and I know for me, and a lot of guys probably wouldn't be comfortable saying this, but I've benefited over the years through working with a counselor and working with a life coach because they both helped me to understand why I was responding in certain ways and what was making me do that. And it helped me to be a better parent. And so if parents out there are looking at this going, I don't know how to do this, that doesn't mean that you can't learn it. It's always possible to continue to grow or to find healing. Again, great resources. Please reach out to Linda or myself. We'd be more than happy to connect you with resources because this is part of the process of growing.
Yeah, some people like to read, some people like to have one-on-one, some people like to have a coach, some people like to have a spiritual director. All of those help us to become a better person, I think, in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the fourth one is a desire for touch. And so this brings in questions, of course, as we look at these areas of chastity, of living in line with God's plan for sexuality. But also, there's this element that Dr. Mark and Debbie brought out that there's a need for non sexual touch. So, kind of talk about that. What have you seen with that? And what do you think is important for parents to know?
I think, especially with older generations, touch was probably like hugs and, well, it depended on the families, of course, and what nation of origin they came from. But hopefully, parents are much more touchy feely, hugging, than they ever were. The example that's the most stark one in my book is the Romanian babies, the iron babies of Romania that were orphans and they were left alone. And a lot of them just died because that's how significant touch was. The other thing I heard one time, and it struck me as wow, that Jesus always touched everybody that he healed. He didn't just say the words and gave them a blessing and, you're on your own now, get going. He touched every one of them because physical touch is so important for the human psyche.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
love through touch. And then, of course, then you have the improper touch, which then does exactly the opposite, right? Good touch makes you feel loved and included. Sexual touch that's inappropriate or any type of inappropriate touch makes you feel unsafe, unloved, unheard, unblessed. It undoes everything. So,
Exactly. And that can lead to those traumas that we talked about that now we look for ways to mask the pain that we experience there. So, absolutely. The fifth one is the desire to be chosen. How does that play out and what thoughts do you have on that one?
I think the best example I can give parents for this one is more, like in a family, let's just assume everybody is chosen, right? I mean, that the parents want every one of their children and love them appropriately and stuff like that. But the thing that parents can be aware of is if their child comes home from school, for instance, and really had a desire to be, like when they're picking groups, like, okay, this little group here, this is the captain of your team, and that's the captain of your team. Now let's pick teams, okay? And if your child is always the last one chosen, they're going to start feeling that pain, right? And so every time they come home, I think it's a really good question to ask. So, did you guys play any games today at school? How was that? Was that fun? What happened? How they pick teams? Or did you get chosen for that? Whatever is going on at school, drama club, whatever. You get to ask the questions first, right? So do it. Ask them, were they chosen? How would they feel if they weren't chosen? And just know that we choose you always, but here's how you can work through that. So next time, and hopefully the parent will come up with some suggestions of how they can avoid that sting of not being chosen. Because this one, I think, actually probably applies more out of the home than in the home, in my opinion. And that hurts too. That hurts just as bad, when you're always the last one chosen because you're the littlest on the team or the slowest, the this. And I know this from my experience with our last daughter because she has Down syndrome. So when they would pick teams, I would see Kira, last one chosen. And I could see her just kind of, and then we're talking in young grades. In the older grades, it wasn't so much because then they put her with other kids with disabilities more so than in a regular classroom. But it happens to all of our children, not just the able-bodied ones or the mentally sharp ones. It also disaffects our children who have special needs. So
Yeah.
something to be And even within the family, you go to family outings, right? Where all the families get together and, just to be watchful that you're not aiding and abetting a situation where the youngest one is always the last one or always the first one. Sometimes that's also a problem, right? The youngest is always the first one. And then the oldest one is like, well, I guess I'm just kind of, don't really matter as much anymore. So we have to avoid all those ties where someone seems to be always the first or the funniest or the this or the that or.
Yeah. Well, and just to complicate it more, then you have middle kids that sometimes feel like they get
Right.
ignored.
Exactly. I mean, so parents just have to be sensitive to changing things up and letting some kids take the lead one day and the other kids take the lead the next day, mixing it all up. And I think that works. But like I said, I do think that this desire is more of a problem outside of the home.
Yeah. Even for myself as an adult, I find that the stakes are higher. I don't know if that's a good way to put it or not. I guess, where I get chosen for the kickball team in elementary school is important to me. But now maybe I apply for a job or I apply for a college. And how do I respond in those moments when I'm not chosen? Is that speaking to my value as a person or just my fit for what that particular group is looking for in a person that they're going to include? And good place, I guess, for parents to come back to the idea of unconditional love, that our kids themselves have unlimited worth just because they're a child of God. And I'm never going to be an astronaut. I'm never going to be an Olympian and get chosen for that. But that doesn't mean that God can choose me for something else that's good. So these are complicated things that parents have to deal with. All right. Second to last one, the desire to be included.
Well, I'm going to give you the example. So our kids want to be included. It's kind of really closely related to the chosen as well. They want to have friendships and they want to have friends and they want their friends to want them to join them. And sometimes they're not invited. And it's kind of related. So we were at a seminar last summer in Kansas. It was a family conference in Wichita. And this young parent, he and his wife came up to me and they were asking me some questions. And he said he's really upset because his son got into some trouble. He was, I think, about 12 or 13. He and his friends put some firecrackers between the door of an old lady's house. And the door, boo, made a bunch of noise. And the older lady was upset and called him. And he was saying, so I just wish my son would choose better friends. So why isn't he choosing better friends? And I said, maybe, just maybe, you're looking at it wrong. Maybe you should ask yourself, why isn't your son the good friend?
Mhm.
To be able to stand up and say to his friends, we can't do this. And I don't know that that's necessarily related to this chosen one, but I think it is. And he said, wow, I never thought of that. He said, I'm always worried about who my kids' friends, what the quality of them. I'm not really looking at my son as needing to man up, you know?
Yeah.
So to be chosen does mean that you have to have something to offer, I would hope, right? When we're chosen for something that we're demonstrating. And hopefully it's all positive. And that's why somebody wants to be our friend. But if we're chosen because we're popular, that doesn't mean anything. Or if we're chosen because we're rich, that doesn't mean anything. So parents have to be looking at who's choosing their friends and what are their kids choosing as well. And hopefully parents are more concerned about, is my son or my daughter a good friend that's choosing well?
Well, and I think I can look at some of the greatest pains as a parent that I felt towards my daughters was when they weren't chosen and included.
Mhm.
And it just breaks your heart as a parent. And how often do kids that choose the quote unquote wrong group of friends, is that because Maybe what we think is the good group of friends didn't include them, didn't choose them to come along. And is there a pain there that is there too? And both requires us to maybe encourage them to pick up some other skills to be a better friend, but also some compassion to understand the hurts they have so that they know they're worthy of good friends.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And then the final one is the desire to be affirmed. So go ahead and talk to us about the desire to be affirmed and how that plays out in our lives and how we can help our kids feel affirmed.
Well, I know Mark Laaser talks about affirming a lot in his book because I think that he didn't feel affirmed, and that led to some of his issues that he had developed as an adult. And I'm just going to read this quote here. Affirmation from someone is a reminder that we are doing well. It builds us up, whereas criticism and put downs are harmful reminders that we don't deserve to be affirmed. So when a child is not affirmed, he or she still yearns for it and tries to find it from someone. The unaffirmed child often morphs into becoming a people pleaser. They develop low self esteem, lack personal confidence, and feelings of self worth. They often develop intimacy disorders, perfectionism traits, and they carry around shame and or guilt. They generally do not learn how to build or establish healthy personal boundaries. So this one is really, really important for parents to affirm. And you hear it in some offhanded ways with people these days when they're affirming their kid. Oh, he's so great at that, but that's because he's got me for his dad. Have you ever heard anything like that before?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Hopefully always joking, but yes,
But joke. So I'm going to get to that for a sec
yeah. Okay.
because kids don't understand jokes very well,
Uh,
right? They don't understand that adult to adult, go ahead and joke all you want.
mhm.
But when a kid is involved, you don't joke like that because they don't know how to take it. Is he joking at me? Is he making fun of me? Is he making fun of himself? But they don't understand it. So you might as well not have said anything. It would have been better off to have not said anything.
Yeah.
So if you got something positive to say it, mean it, and say it again. Because our kids need to hear positive affirmation, not just this crude joking stuff. Because affirmation is a big one. From what I gathered from Mark Laaser,
Yeah.
this is huge.
And you alluded to it, but for someone that's not familiar with Dr. Mark Glazer, he was an evangelical pastor, ended up being removed from his ministry role because he was addicted and using pornography. And so he went through this very drastic healing process and had to face these things so much that he recognized this. And even I can relate to this. When a child is not affirmed, he or she will still yearn for it and try to find it from someone. The unaffirmed child often morphs into a people pleaser. And I can really relate to that because if, and maybe, I don't know if, again, this is a distinction for guys. You share your perspective on it, but so often I get my self-worth based on how I perform or how I perceive I'm performing. And then it becomes me constantly going out there to try to please people to earn affirmation versus if we can really instill that in our kids that, yeah, it's great that you did well, but I would love you whether you won or lost. And am I as affirming and accepting of you whether you win or lose? I don't know if you have additional thoughts on that or not.
Well, it's funny. We just went to a Cana dinner Saturday night, and the psychologist that was talking a little bit about the fears of men. His basic need, well, let me go to a woman first because I can recall it. A
Yep.
woman, her highest need is to be loved, and her biggest fear is to be abandoned. For a man, his highest need is to be respected, and his biggest fear is to be a failure.
Right.
So that feeds into what you were saying about
Absolutely.
my performance really matters to me, right? Because that's such a huge fear. And this psychologist went on to say that it was interesting because he thinks, so Adam and Eve in their garden, right? She's blaming him, but he abandoned her. Adam abandoned Eve. And then she criticized him by giving him the apple and turning them all into sinners or whatever. So it was a perfect storm
Yeah.
of nothing going right
Yeah.
because of some of those fears.
He abandoned her, so she felt abandoned. And then he didn't do what he was supposed to, so he felt like a failure.
Totally total failure.
And here we are all these years later, still suffering. Right? Well, excellent. Well, Linda, I am enjoying these conversations. In the last podcast, you mentioned you have a book coming out for children. I'd love to have you share that. And I know it's still a couple months away, but tell us a little bit about what that book is and what you're hoping to accomplish with that.
Well, there was a great book I thought years ago that I would read to my kids when they were little. It was called The Wonderful Way That Babies Are Made by Larry Christensen. And I've been looking for it high and low lately because as I'm at these seminars and have my booth, I wanted to purchase some more of them because parents are always asking, do you have any book for kids about talking about sex? And I said, no, my book is for adolescents, and stuff like that. So I've been looking high and low, and I actually called the publisher and asked them if they'd ever sell me the book and the rights to it because I said, I can't find it anywhere. And they said, no, it's not being printed anymore. And I said, well, can I buy the rights for it? No, we're not selling the rights. The family doesn't want to sell the rights. We're not doing anything with the book. We're not developing it. So I thought, well, I got to write my own. So that's all there's to it. So my book is going to be called, Let Me Tell You About ... And so it's supposed to kind of stimulate the let me tell you about the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees, that song. And it just goes into how creation is all, of course, masterminded by God. Day 1, day 2, day 3. And then by the time the 6th day comes, then God makes Adam and then he makes Eve. So then kind of the story after that just goes into how God makes you. And it talks about the development or conception. And I talk about the spark of God that is released at the moment of the conception of the sperm and the egg. And it talks about the husband and the wife love each other. And that's how you came to be. And it's got some little questions for the kids to read, but it's got beautiful pictures in it. I love the pictures. They're real colorful. And so it should get the little kids' attention. And as the mom or dad's reading it, I will expect that the 6-year-old and the 7-year-old and the 8-year-old will start wanting to hear it too. And then sit down and, maybe explain a few things to to their parents about what they understood or ask questions as well. So that's that one.
Yeah. So let me tell you about ... Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I know you're putting the finishing touches on that. So I would certainly encourage people, go to your website, get on your newsletter list, and I'm sure you'll let people know when that's available. And for folks, what is your website again?
www.fortifyingfamiliesoffaith.com.
Yes, fortifyingfamiliesoffaith.com. There you go.
So there's a G on the end of fortifying, and then OF, and then FAITH.com.
Yeah. All right. Well, excellent. Thank you again, Linda. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it. And I know I will certainly probably see you at some upcoming conferences too. So I look forward to that. And we look forward to visiting with the audience on the next podcast. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Freedom to Love podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and share it with another parent. You can also rate us on iTunes. It helps us to expand the reach of our ministry and help more parents. And until next time, know that we are praying for you and your families, and may God bless you.